get started on today's notes over a review of simplifying non-perfect square roots. The first thing I want to do is go over perfect squares and square roots. So first, let's get into a little bit of vocabulary. Right here, we have the square root of 25. This right here is called the index. You might recall something like a cube root of 25, or a cube root, or a fourth root of 25, or a fifth root of 25. The symbol right here is called the radical. The whatever is underneath the radical or inside is called the radicand. Moving over to the right, I have a perfect squares chart, 0 through 15. That means 0 squared is 0, 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4. And what does that look like? 2 squared, or 2 to the second power, is 4. 3 squared, 3 to the second power, is 9. That's this perfect square chart. So if we were to simplify square roots that are perfect squares, the square root of 100 right here, this undoes it. It's the reverse. It undoes that square. So the square root of 100 is 10. That means that 10 squared is 100, right? The square root of 49, that's right here. Square root of 49 is 7. They're perfect squares. That means that 7 squared is 49. So the square root of 49 is 7. So now what do we do when the number underneath the radical, so the radicand, is not a perfect square? In math, we simplify these. And there's a process that you'll use. And there's different ways that you can do this. I'm going to show you my way. So what you're going to do is you're going to find, with this number, looking at the square root of 72. Now, in the example to the top, there was a 2 as the index. If there's no number there, it's assumed a 2. So this is the square root of 72. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the biggest perfect square that is a factor of the radicand and write it as a product of two factors. Okay, what does that mean? That means when I go back to my perfect square chart, what's the biggest number in this right column? Oops, I want to make sure you can see it. In this column on the right, that's this column. What's the biggest number that is a factor? Okay, that means it goes into that number a whole number of times. Well, what you can do is you can just go through your table. 72 divided by, obviously, 1, okay? 72 divided by 4, okay? 72 divided by 9, 72 divided by 16, 72 divided by 25, 72 divided by 36, 72 divided by 49, 72 divided, and you can keep going. Find the biggest perfect square that is a factor, okay? So let's say, obviously, 72, 9 is a factor of 72. But is it the biggest perfect square that goes into 72? No, it's not. And what you can actually do is you can go in reverse, okay? 72 divided by, you can go in reverse, 64. 72 divided by 49. 72 divided by 36. And you get that 36 is a factor. 36 times what is a factor, or is 72? 2. So here's how I would do this. Square root of 72, I can rewrite it as the square root of 36 times the square root of 2. So now I've just rewritten it as a product of two factors. Okay, product meaning multiply. What is the square root of 36? It's 6. So I can rewrite that number as 6 times the square root of 2. And I can write it as 6 square roots of 2. Or you might also say it, or hear people say it, as 6 root 2. Let's do the same thing with numbers 3 through 6. This is a review, so I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. Number 3, the square root of 20. Okay, let's look at our perfect squares chart. What's the biggest perfect square that is a factor of 20? It's 4. So I'm going to rewrite the square root of 20 as the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. Because if 4 times 5 is 20, then the square root of 4 times the square root of 5 is the square root of 20. What is the square root of 4? It's 2. So I'm going to rewrite it as 2 square roots of 5, which is the same thing as 2 times the square root of 5. Let's look at negative square root of 32. This right here, when there's a negative out in front, that just means -1 times the square root of 32. Just makes it negative. So let's rewrite it like that. -1 times the square root of 32. What's the biggest perfect square that goes into 32? Let's start, and I'm going to erase some of this so that there's not so much over here. The biggest factor, or the biggest perfect square that's a factor of 32, start with 25, and I encourage you to pause the video and find the biggest perfect square that's a factor of 32. It's 16 right here, okay? So I'm going to rewrite this as -1 times the square root of 16 times the square root of what? The square root of 2. What is the square root of 16? It's 4. So I'm going to rewrite it again as -1 times 4 times the square root of 2, which is what? -4 square roots of 2, or -4 root 2. Let's move on to 2 square roots of 80. Again, this is 2 square roots of 80. That's just 2 times the square root of 80. What's the biggest perfect square that goes into 80 a whole number of times, or that is a factor of 80? I encourage you to pause the video and try to find that number now. You can start by doing 80 divided by 64, 80 divided by 49, 80 divided by 36. Okay, what do you get as the biggest perfect square that's a factor of 80? It's 16. 16 times what is 80? 16 times 5, which means the square root of 16 times the square root of 5 is the square root of 80. So I've just rewritten it as a product of 2 factors. What is the square root of 16? It's 4. So again, I'm just going to rewrite it. And now in multiplication, I'm just going to multiply across. 2 times 4 is 8 square roots of 5. And that's my answer. Let's get into the last one. -7 square roots of 27. Well, that's just -7 times, 27. What's the biggest perfect square that goes into 27 a whole number of times? 9. 9 times what is 27? 9 times 3, which means the square root of 9 times the square root of 3 is 27. What is the square root of 9? It's 3. So I'm just going to rewrite it. -7 times 3 times the square root of 3. And now I'm going to rewrite it by simplifying -7 times 3, which is -21 square roots of 3. And that concludes your notes over a review of simplifying non-perfect square roots. I hope it was helpful.